Thanks a lot. Happy Friday, everyone. And I have been looking forward to this presentation for at least 3 months. And the entire team, we've spent so many hours preparing this deck for you. And it's very difficult to sit in front of a room of telco operators and trying to tell you something you don't know, especially as an external analyst who are not working in an operator on a day-to-day basis. But that's my objective. And I will try to speak with the enthusiasm of a sports presenter. So one question that's come up this week and last week and probably the week before is how do we do on the futurescape? And, on the marketscape. And this is a competitive view of how we see the different operators performing in Asia Pacific. Mostly global carriers or strong regional providers. There's about 10 or so in total. And there's a few that have gone up, a few that have very much in a holding pattern, and a few that have gone down. And so we saw a lot of change this year. I'm not going to spend 40 minutes on this. I can easily do it, but Nikhil Batra in the back of the room could tell you a little bit about this product and our methodology and things like that. So I wanted to at least present it to you. And there's a lot of people in this room that have actually increased their positioning since last year. Now, moving forward and sort of recapping on where we've been with this journey, Sandra talked about open and the way in which the industry is going. And last year, this is the only slide from last year, we talked about an industry under construction, typically in 2014. For example, I came across a carrier recently that between 2007 and 2014, they had a 100,000% increase in data traffic, mobile data traffic. And the iPhone basically killed their network. And iPhone 2 came out and really destroyed it. Then the App Store came out and things like that. This same operator in 2015 told me in Dallas, did I just give up the name of the operator? Okay, well, they told me that the traffic will actually increase by another tenfold. And so we will always continue to build and construct where cloud has led to the industrialization of data center. We're going to continue to have interconnects, and we're going to drive those interconnects into Southeast Asia, into places like Myanmar. And we're still an industry that will build. We're known for infrastructure. The network, those 3 graphs that Sandra presented would kind of be irrelevant if we didn't have something to connect a digital enterprise. So the network will be important, the data center will be important, services will be important, but what we're doing is we're shifting to open. So we're no longer talking about how much we can actually build, but how do we open this infrastructure up to make it more intelligent. And last year what we talked about is open flow and open stack and open source. If anyone thinks that IoT is going to amount to anything, it's only going to be possible through the opening of APIs. And if we don't have this sort of interface, then the market is not really going to flourish. And then, of course, we talked about open investment. So we are seeing telcos moving into new adjacencies like media, banks, healthcare. There's lots of digital video. And they're doing it by opening the investment, opening their checkbooks and going into something that's core to telco, mobile payments, that's going to drive the revenue in the future. I see a gentleman from Vodafone in the back of the room, and for example, a great stat I heard in Kenya was M-Pesa is 50% of Kenya's GDP in terms of the transferring of funds. That is a primary source of making things happen. And there's open competition. Of course, you hear the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons, they're out there to get us, but the way, and it's not the way we look at it, but my point with open competition is if you're an incumbent operator and you're looking in your rearview mirror and you're saying, well, we're doing better than the alternative provider in our market, therefore we're doing okay, you're looking in the wrong rearview mirror, you're looking in the wrong direction, and the way in which it's coming up to at the moment is any competitor can enter this market, become a service provider, and knock you sideways. They can invent a new market that you haven't thought of yet. IoT is very much up for grabs. There's a lot sort of happening in that space. So why does this all matter? Has anyone ever heard of The Diffusion of Innovation, a book in 1962? I wasn't around then, believe it or not, but what this book argues, or it looks at the pace of innovation and ideas and how it spreads across cultures. So let's translate that into our industry. Over-the-top providers typically develop much faster than telcos do. Some enterprises even develop much faster than the telcos do. You're not actually cutting edge when it actually comes to innovation. For example, Google will package 2 billion application containers every single week. By the time my presentation finishes, there'll be 600 million application containers they're going to package up. Facebook has the wedge, top-of-switch, open source infrastructure that they're doing. Netflix taught us how to drive a digital strategy through open APIs, and the list really goes on. And it's not really about competition. In some ways it is, but you got to look at these new technologies like SDN and NFV and DevOps, which is a way in which we get developers and IT admins to work more closely together to equalize. That's going to be one equalizer. What's going to be the next equalizer? This year is the year of the platform. 2005, we said it was the year of the open. This year is the year of the platform, where platform will actually give us scale. It'll give us the ability to connect the right APIs with the right data points, with the right users, under the right policies or the right security framework to do it. If you're looking at a platform and you're thinking about just an SDN infrastructure, you're probably looking in the wrong place. It's going to be compute, it's going to be storage, it's going to be network. It's going to go all the way down to the data center infrastructure management layer. And it's a really good thing we have Schneider here, as well as Cisco and AppDirect to speak about how API and how platform impacts their business. The other thing is, what does it actually mean for the network? And in our opinion, the network's going to have a couple different properties that it didn't have previously. The first off is going to be agile, meaning you're going to be able to program the network to actually understand the applications that sit on it so that it's workload aware. It's going to be enabling new capabilities, like service orchestration is a popular one, deterministic routing on IP layers. That can do wonders for business continuity, disaster recovery. It can do things on security. It can actually improve the performance of your network on an IP, public IP layer, not going to MPLS always. And then, of course, they're going to be intelligent. Okay, we heard that argument 10 years ago about NetFlow or something like that, where we can understand a little bit about behaviors in network. It's gone well beyond that. We're going to take our OS data, our BSS data, our CRM data. We're going to put it in the platform so we actually know something about our customers. That's one aspect of it. We're also going to be looking at the network as a security platform. For example, there's a provider in this room that analyzes, I believe, 8 billion events in a week from the network that we run a security practice, obviously. There's another provider I mentioned earlier that analyzes 100 petabits of traffic every single day. That's the scale that a telco can bring to security, because security ultimately is about analytics, if you want to be able to predict outcomes. And the last one is we're going to be policy-based and contextual aware, meaning we're going to get rid of the firewall. Firewalls will still be important, but as data moves to the cloud, we got to follow the data. Okay, so what did we say last year, and are we crazy? I mean, everyone asked this one, right? So we said that telcos will move into the API business. I think it happened, and we'll discuss it a little bit further. They got into precision advertising, where they looked at mobile devices, the location of users. They cross-referenced that with maybe CRMs, and were able to do more, start the beginning of targeted advertising. We definitely started to pursue big data. We went for SDN initially for margin gains. We put it initially in wireless infrastructure to bring down the cost of wireless infrastructure. If it's going up 100,000%, we're not going to get 100,000% more from our customers. We got to lower our CapEx. We got to bring that cost down and things of that nature. Open source did start to fragment. We saw big acquisitions around security. Industrial IoT was carried over the fixed network, and typically the use case was manufacturing. Workloads defined buying behaviors, and that a lot of decision making was central. So a Malaysian enterprise decided what's best for the country of Malaysia, and we saw that in Indonesia and other markets. And we saw the mobile commerce boom and the adoption of the mobile wallet. I think if you put those together, that kind of explains why this year we have a number of leading e-commerce companies or m-commerce companies here. We're seeing this boom in India and China. We think we're going to see it in Indonesia and other markets. It's actually going to be big stuff, and these could be potentially the next over-the-tops in some ways, because as a telco, these guys like hyperscale. They like open architectures. They like open source. They're still going to buy a lot of connectivity because there's 1 billion devices that are going to ship at the end of the decade, and they're going to still need that user experience. Content distribution networks, caching, compression, all the things most of the people in the room really get and we're good at. That's why that's one of the things that we think is going to happen. So Let's get started for predictions, and I'm just going to start off with prediction number 1. We're saying that by 2017, 65% of IT organizations will implement hybrid IT that leverages in-house, third-party clouds, and so forth. And the implications from an IT point of view is you're going to need a lot of flexibility for your data center, your WAN, your LAN, your wireless LAN, your core, and your edge. You're going to have to look at SDN as kind of a programmable connectivity tissue that's going to give you the agility and automation. And I'll explain that a little bit more. But if there's one thing from this initial slide is the orchestration platform. It's not a race to how many different cloud providers you can connect, but how well is your platform to bring workloads across different clouds, to bring it on site, to put it in the cloud, to bring it back. And that's where most organizations, telcos at the moment, including system integrators, that's where we're falling down. We have to think about integration management and policy-based security and compliance, especially in the telco industry. In terms of the business unit, we actually see the real possibility of more data actually being in the cloud than on-premise, so we need to start thinking about that. Not all cloud providers that are around today are going to be around tomorrow. Some will be acquired, some will go out of business. Business process and employee productivity are drivers for networked investment, but we actually need to think of how do we take these nebulous concepts and create business outcomes, because the deeper you get into business units and LOBs, they actually want to hear about business outcomes. They are sick and tired of hearing about the availability of the network, the low latency, and how the packet loss. You look like everybody else, but if you can define business outcomes, you've actually differentiated yourself, and that's where we see the requirement going. So what's the guidance? Try to develop best practices between cloud and network. What you might want to consider doing is building up templates. What I hear a lot of is, oh, we got Riverbed, or we have Ipanema, or we have somebody else, and so we can solve all of your application problems that sit in the cloud. That's actually not necessarily true. If you have 100 or 1,000 applications, one single vendor is not going to solve all of that or guarantee that it's going to get from point A to point B. Video behaves very differently than ERP applications. And the other thing to consider is the shift is going to start to be on the end user experience. That's fantastic that you make my application accelerate, but how does it perform on the device in the field? Because more people are going to be, especially the Gen Y, they're going to be out of the office and out in the field. Here's another thing to consider. We asked in our cloud survey, what kind of clouds do you aspire to have? And we got legacy, we have public and virtual private, and lots of different answers. We expect that. We're always going to get different answers for the types of clouds we have. We asked the individuals, different survey, what kind of networks do you have? We have legacy, we have MPLS, we have ELANs and E-lines and everything else, but we're not having the same conversation. The network people are buying network, the cloud are buying cloud, and we have never really figured out a way to put that together. But if we're going to go to diversified IT, we need to bring it together, and you know what that means? See you later layers. What I mean by that is we're going to lose the preoccupation of talking about layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. We're going to be multi-service. And okay, some of your MPLS product managers might be upset with that, but that's the trend. They want public, they want layer 3, they want layer 2. You've got to look at what layer works for which workload, at what price point. And we're going to discuss a little bit of that as we go forward. So where does that leave us with? How do we get from there to here? Where do we go next? Excuse me, my throat's drying up. So 15% of enterprises by next year are going to go for SD-WAN. So if you start to virtualize the network, now you can actually start having this conversation. We think this figure is going to jump to 60% by 2019. Now, what that means for IT is you get better automation and network management. Our surveys tell us that the reason why SDN is really interesting is because of network management. That's the first thing they want. Think of the 110 hours you have to spend doing a reconfiguration of something. All that manual process can actually become a thing of the past. The networks become more programmable, okay? But also there's this new era of NFV, network function virtualization apps that are coming from the pipe. And what we're seeing is the IT are telling us that we love all this, but we're concerned about security, interoperability, we don't have budget and all this stuff, and that's why it's important to be the trusted partner. They're not all saying we want to go with a network equipment provider, they're not all saying we want to go with a software vendor, but this really opens up the market to become, as a telco, the trusted partner. And actually in our survey, the #1 partner for bringing multi-vendors together was the telco. You didn't win in all the other categories, but the telco had a lot to say in that particular one. So what we think is the IT and LOB is going to be a shared service model. So remember the guy or the girl or whoever said they own the network? Network ownership, just like layers, are gone. No one owns the network. It's a shared service infrastructure with different LOBs provisioning the network as they need fit. How many of you have talked to an enterprise that builds a separate network for their video as they do for their other applications? You can now take a network and build it of one network and partition the network logically to support the different requirements across the business units. You do not need to build two separate units, networks anymore. And the rise of devices becomes that each employee becomes a microsite. So, an employee on a mobile device somewhere out in the field is a VPN. It's a VPN connection. Pretty much becomes a site. So you need to think about how to make the policy consistent, roles-based, contextually aware to the individual employees. That's where we're going with the intelligent network previously. So what are the recommendations? We see across-the-board demand for layer 4 to layer 7. That's your firewalls, that's your load balancers, IDS, IPS, you name the acronym. Everything that you've done on the appliance till now is going to be available in NFV. And that's the first thing, that's the first cab off the rank. That's the first thing that's going to go. You don't just start with firewalls. I would recommend you go with everything. That, from a just real quick and technical perspective, that's going to increase your SIOs and your ARPUs per connection. That's going to make the relevancy of pipes more valid. You'll get improvements in network automation and lower OpEx. That's an important thing to say. But the single most important thing from this slide, if you don't remember anything else, as telcos, you've got to cross-train your network engineers and get them to be more software inclined. That's IT, that's data centers, server and storage networks, and trying to understand the network end to end as we get rid of network ownership. I know it's easier said than done. I would hate to be in the room for some of those conversations, but that's what's required. And some of the large global providers are telling me that they're doing that exactly now. Start to cross-train so you're relevant in a software-defined or future. Here are some providers we just selected at random that are doing SD-WAN in Asia or plan to have significant offerings that will disrupt the market in some way in 2016. That's an IDC lens. I have one at home, and those are the operators I see coming down in the future. The next one is about cloud. By 2018, more than 70%, which is a higher number than worldwide, will access public cloud, your infrastructure, and your SaaS via the aggregation hubs that the carriers are setting up. So from a security point of view, you have to think of security, availability, and performance of these interconnected architectures. That's where MPLS comes into play, for example. If you really value security, you might have a private IP conversation. If you just need sort of some kind of secure remote access, you might want to do that over public IP. It doesn't matter. You just need to have all the tools available to give the enterprise what they want. The role of IT shifts from completely internal to managing and brokering externally sourced resources, and the service provider itself kind of becomes a little bit of a partner in this process. Shadow IT starts to disappear. That's quite a prediction, but we think it's going to happen because in this case it's not necessary. The cost of IT becomes very transparent. You know exactly what an Amazon cloud costs you versus some Salesforce cloud or something else. It'll be a great dashboard that tells you what that is all about. And the IT and the LOB start to work together on security, data governance, and compliance issues, especially in healthcare, banks, communication and medias, any sort of sensitive sector that we believe will be a trend. So some of the most important things here is focus on the platforms, what we're talking about before. You really want to own the customer. If the customer is going to go to 3 to 5 clouds as they're doing now, and they might quadruple this by the end of the decade, they might as well do it through your network and through your portal. That you own the experience. Then you focus on the integration of the different clouds. Of course, that ties into orchestration, what I said earlier, and management. But really, there's a great opportunity and a roundtable today on how we can build a marketplace together. How telcos could basically at scale help an enterprise build its own internal marketplace, or on the national market work with maybe 50 different cloud providers. Maybe use their billing systems to put them in the billing systems and just give a single customer experience. Use the assets and capabilities you have to drive the market and differentiate. Security will need to follow the cloud, as we mentioned. And what I mean by that is when I drill down, I'm talking about IDS, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, all of your advanced analytics. Start to look at machine learning for security and keep the focus on data sovereignty, because that always comes up in every conversation. Where does the data sit? And everyone wants to know it. And now regulators are saying, if you want to build an Indonesian data center, or if you want to do cloud in Indonesia, we need an Indonesian data center. Considering all the markets, that's an important consideration. Every organization becomes a cloud provider. We don't really think about it anymore. That's the destination. And some of the providers in our IDC magnifying glass I have at home, these are the ones that have come up. So you not just have carriers, you have other like carrier-neutral hotels, co-location providers like Equinix, and the list of partners will grow profusely. This is just what we're seeing right now. We think we're just at the edge of something bigger. In terms of UC, we think that UC is going to also be a really big one, because UC is going to be 60% of implementations by 2017, cloud-based UC. If you look at all of our cloud research, when we ask, we go through the process of asking you which workload you want in which cloud, UC comes up as one of the top. So UC is not that discussion we had in 2007 or something about integrating PBXs and all that. We're way, way beyond that. UC IT departments will want the cloud equivalents, and UC is actually going into contact center. So all of those layers of contact center and all the complexity in that integration will now be cloud enabled. And there's a number of providers sitting in this room that have done a really good job at contact center in Asia, especially for cloud. We think VDI is going to come back, because that has a role in it. We're going to have to start looking at mobile devices with UC, with location-based services. And increasingly, and interestingly enough, some speculate that IoT might actually replace social for the big channel that goes in a contact center. So IoT is actually becoming very topical when you start mixing it in with the other things and talking about it in a UC context. And UC is something that everyone in this room understands pretty well. To Sandra's presentation of the IDC research, it speaks a lot to digital transformation. How else are you going to have omni-channel without unified communications? We think that UC is a very critical enabling technology. We see this happening in all customer-facing operations, marketing, customer service, admin operation, and sales. We see that the role is actually being able to integrate with enterprise applications through open APIs, and we see this driving the whole discussion of workplace transformation. Working outside of the office, the recruitment of Gen Y, being mobile first, consumerization not only of devices but of IT. And because of that, we're thinking that our thinking is you need to start writing your business cases, not around technology, as we've done for years, but think about how UC, with digital transformation, could lead to reduction in facility costs. Think of a hot desk strategy. Think of ways to increase employee productivity in your business case. Recruitment and retention of younger talent. A number of vendors in this room have made that a very big goal for Singapore. And also transforming customer experience. Customer experience and digital transformation very much go hand in hand. We think that UC will actually start to drive, in the cloud, will start to drive other innovations around things we could never touch, our old CRMs or ERP applications. They'll actually start to integrate, maybe through APIs, maybe through other means. It'll also have something to do with mobility. And really, the driver, the motor behind this vehicle, or this direction we're heading to, called digital transformation. There's a lot of different research around it. In terms of what strategic processes have been digitized, this is some research from our C-suite data that Sandra and many others have presented over the year. The other thing we think about is emerging markets. We think that at least 20% of large enterprises will be investing in SD-WAN and other virtualized solutions in emerging markets. And there's a couple reasons for that. We have the lower CapEx, OpEx. You don't need to have an IT, someone in every single market. But it actually gives you a central control plane to push out all your features, your functionality across your network, whether it's NFV or something else. And the other driver for that is a continued investment in fiber. Fiber is very much the platform for this happening. And we expect in the BU layer some technologies to actually leapfrog. And we expect more partnerships. As services become more local, we expect IT to work in partnership with LOBs to make sure they got the relevant services in the relevant markets for their employees. This is actually going to favor a little bit of the regional providers in this market. And one thing to consider, though, is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. China and Taiwan, for example, in our research, are absolutely rejecting white box technology. They don't like it, and I can't quite explain it yet. While Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia are accepting it. We think, and a lot of companies for years, including vendors, have made good money off a CPE resale business. We think if you're deploying it from NFV, it'll actually start to challenge the CPE resale business. You don't need to have opcos in all of these markets to support your customers. The reason why opcos were set up is that it can be very difficult to bring a firewall into a market or another piece of equipment. It can be a customs issue, taxation issues. It just takes a long time to import. It could be paperwork. If you can deploy this from the network, you're actually in a good position. The other exciting bit of news is this hasn't been shown yet to anybody, but we're seeing a lot of excitement around SDN and NFV in these emerging markets. If I were presenting to you last year, none of these markets around the South China Sea and beyond would not be green. They would be more looking like Vietnam in the red zone. They really did not have a lot of interest in it. But we're seeing in conversations we've had in a few of these markets, the enterprise customer is really willing to embrace SDN and NFV and move at accelerated pace from premise to cloud. It was a cultural thing in some of these markets to hang on to their, we called them box huggers, to hang on to the stuff, but we think that it's really going to move, and it's going to be an opportunity that's going to take off for the service provider industry. Where does that leave us with APIs? We think that last year we talked about how the carriers themselves will get into APIs. Now we're seeing it hand over to enterprise. And the reason why enterprises are interested in it, because it kind of improves the automation, kind of accelerates development cycles and lowers the integration costs. For carriers as well as enterprise, I talked about platforms earlier, but you're also going to need gateways. You're going to need gateways to manage all of these APIs. For example, a statistic for you, every minute there are 4,000 IoT connected devices. Each of those devices run an application. How are we going to manage security and the deployment of those applications without some sort of gateway strategy? That's one aspect of it. Another, of course, is we also might want to consider containerization versus VMs at the edge of the network. But what we're seeing here is APIs are also going to be really important for multi-vendor integration. You do not have to have expensive consultants coming onto your site and doing that anymore, which is advantageous in a market that's heavily sort of restricted by budgets, and increasingly being the case. So the business unit, we're saying, needs to work with IT and the LOB, decide which applications, which databases should be API enabled. Because there's a lot of capabilities with API. If you go to Programmable Web, they report about 14,000 different types of APIs. There's some that are out in the industry that telcos use, like one API, but you got to think about it. How do we do this at scale? Because telcos are now doing APIs, but most of you don't have it figured out how to do it at scale. Which people in my organization, or which customers do I go to, or which partners do I go to, open up which APIs, and what do they do with them once we get there? They don't have that program yet, and this is where we think there's a role. The industrialization will lead to the importance of DevOps, and we're increasingly seeing that lines of business, especially in security, they don't want your portal. They want your portal, but they also want theirs. They're not just going to, if you sell them, ServiceNow or whatever the portal is, they're not just going to grab that and say, thank you very much. They're going to have their own ways they want to look at the network. They're going to have their own people down in the lines of business that want to view things differently. They're going to do that through their own APIs. And if you're going into security monitoring, for example, what we're seeing is Fortinet has a great solution, and so does the next vendor, so does the next vendor. But they're looking for an API that can give you the holistic dashboard of the right alerts that go to the right departments, that give the right workflow and that sort of thing. So APIs also integrate on the enterprise side. It's not something that you're doing anymore. So we think that you should focus on kind of three areas: the communications, so your messaging and your alerts that come with APIs that fit really well with UCaaS; context, location-based services, knowing something about your customer, and commerce, billing systems, digital wallets. These are great things for telcos to consider with API. APIs will drive IoT and big data. Storage moves to the edge and connectivity moves to the edge. In our surveys, 45% of IoT will be processed in the data center, 45% at the edge, 10% are not sure. So you need to think about how do we do all of this at the edge, how do we do all of this at the core. The last thing, and this is the telco angle, is you have APIs for the quality of service, deep packet inspection, security, redundancy, path optimization. There's a lot of capabilities and conversations you can start to have with e-commerce companies, with over-the-top companies, with really anyone that cares about these things as it relates to their network and cares about them at the right price point. So that leads us to prediction number 7. We see that approximately 40% of IT budgets will focus on mobilizing and optimizing devices, pretty much the applications, and then it's going to decline in subsequent years. We see a lot of advancements in technologies suppliers on the software side offering good broad-based solutions, mobile device management, mobile information management, application and so forth. Versioning is becoming a lot easier, but in 2018, we're going to see 60% of Fortune 1000 companies moving and implementing IoT. And that's going to start to peel away a little bit of the budget that was there for mobile devices. It just takes us a little bit to a new era. Mobile devices will continue, however, to digitize business processes, the elimination of paper-based systems, just increasing in productivity, and every time I speak to an enterprise, there's always something that could be mobilized and digitized, and that conversation still needs to be had in a lot of places. There'll still be an investment in mobile channels. Banks are huge at that. Mobile channel is really important for omni-channel and digital transformation. It's one of the avenues out there. And then a little bit more on the shift to IoT in the last one. So we think the opportunity is your LOB applications. You still need to think about your mobile enterprise management solutions, applications and information management. Additional layers of security are coming up, so they're not happy with the off-the-shelf. They want some additional layers. So that conversation needs to be had in some circles. And we're seeing the revamp in our surveys of VDI, the video desktop infrastructure. And then IoT is becoming more of a requirement. I remember I said that there are 4,000 devices that are connected every minute. You might want to consider taking these MDM-like solutions, maybe your AirWatches or whatever your vendor is, and applying that to an IoT environment to deliver security at scale. It goes in hand or hand in glove with what we're talking about, gateways. How do we, at a low price point, manage the proliferation of these endpoints that sit at the edge of our network? And speaking to one bank who was nice enough to get a call from me when doing these predictions, and he's basically saying it's the integration of the applications that weren't built into the mobile environment that is the most difficult for them to do, while guaranteeing security and performance. It's critical for their customers. I think you're going to find this sentiment in quite a number of places. So moving on to digital transformation, we think that 20% of operators are going to have a true customer-first focus. Now, to qualify that or contextualize that to a telco audience is, so the statement doesn't sound woolly or anything, we think that right now you have your chief telco evangelist. I think most operators have someone who's the chief customer officer or has that role. But what we're seeing is they're typically in sales, they're in operations, or they're in marketing. So they have a split role. We're going to see all these roles converge, where there's actually one person, one throat to choke, direct report to the CEO. That's what's not happened yet. That's our prediction. But IT reporting moves from this ITIL-based and all this service management capability to really personalization and touch points. So it even gets better, more granular, more user-centric at the platform layer. OSS, BSS just goes end-to-end automation, and customer first means you got to have a collaborative component for employees to buy into this stuff. And the argument is, or the argument we're having, or the discussions we have is, if you refresh the IT to allow the employees to have the tools they need to do their job better, they can serve customers better. Maybe you want to reduce the number of screens they have to log into at a contact center. Maybe you want to look at identity and access management, how they can do secure authentication and federate that across devices. Maybe you want to authenticate them through social media. There has to be a way so they can get the tools they need to better serve the customers and serve them quicker and do so at scale. And the thinking is once they're able to do that, you actually might see a change in culture. And it's really going to be the change in culture which is going to be a big driver behind the customer-first focus that we're talking about. So the implications for the IT, for telcos, is really focus on the tight management of your suppliers and your customers, supply and demand chain management. And really, you got to have that fight with legal if there's an extra form or something they don't need to click onto or a waiver they don't need to sign. That should be out of the process. This should be really automated, a couple screens, and your service is provisioned. It should be a really user-friendly portal that gives you all this capability, especially when you go into the consumer market. Continue to build out the touch point metrics. Look at all the ways your customers interact, whether it be typically it's 180 ways a customer would interact with a telco, and try to improve the NPS or whatever measurement you're using at each one of those touch points. I found two examples of carriers, global carriers or regional, that incentivize their executives. 40% of their pay is based on NPS. Their bonus, not their pay, excuse me. 40% of their bonus is based on NPS. And it's all or nothing. You either achieve it or you don't. They do not give you any credit for 99.99% there. You're either there or you're not there. It's black or white in this case. And that's how important this is going to be for operators if you want to change the culture and really consider your customers. And then, of course, you've got to get back into the analytics, your OSS, your BSS, your CRMs, all these fantastic things you can mine to bring that experience to the end user. Here are some examples, and I put one telco in there as an example of a provider that's on that journey. DBS and Changi are further ahead. Typically, you're going to find your best examples, unfortunately, in other industries. They're not going to be, there's not too many in telco at the moment. We also think that managed services is going to start changing as well, and this is where emerging markets start to come back into the picture even more so. At least 70% of enterprises will engage in managed services. All right, we said that a long time ago, but this is what's different about managed services is you're going to have the flexible provisioning, get everyone on the same platform. You're going to have a little bit reduced CapEx, OpEx, but the greenfield shift, the most important thing right now is we see wireless LAN as a big opportunity because telcos you've been really good at, or the industry's been really good at managing the wide area network and the local area network. You haven't really dabbled too much in cloud. You haven't really done too much in wireless LAN. We think the boundaries of end-to-end really will start to expand, and that will be mobile, cloud, infrastructure, software, and platform as a service, all the way into new data center offerings, especially with the movement of NFV. With managed services becoming the dominant model, they need to think about how we work with suppliers to drive the things that are most important to them. Customer satisfaction, employee productivity, increasing profitability. So oftentimes a CFO will talk to a supplier and say, okay, love your technology, but how does this wide area network, how is that going to help me increase my market share? Tell me that, and now I'm more interested. That's a really difficult conversation to have. A CEO will say, how do we become more operationally efficient? How are you going to drive out costs? How are you going to streamline? How are you going to industrialize? Otherwise, I don't want to buy this mousetrap. That's the way in which the conversation is happening. And so we need to think about how we kind of bring the two things together and develop sound business case based on outcomes, not the old static service level agreements. We think your game changers are, it's an imperative to get involved in professional services. So helping your organizations that don't have the skill sets make the transition to managed services. We think you can do things along that, TCO and ROI, but it's really the people skills. In all of our surveys, it's really the people and the technology transfer that brings it across the line, why they choose a telco over a system integrator or somebody else in the category of managed services. And they want multi-vendor solutions. They're not looking for one single vendor. They want lots of options. And I want to prove this to you, right? In 2011, we asked the question, who are your preferred suppliers for managed services? Global IT providers, your CSCs, your HPs, everything else were your suppliers. In 2015, right there, telcos. And if you get this opportunity right, there's $40 billion sitting on the table. If you want to go after the IBMs and your CSCs and really this is an aggressive forecast or aggressive market share, but I'm looking at all things addressable to telcos. And I come up with $40 billion based on our IT services tracker. The last one is this is an adjunct a bit on bandwidth on demand. We think that this is going to, 50% of switched Ethernet are going to start going this direction. With the ubiquity of fiber, why wouldn't it? The fiber becomes the platforms, and BODs will facilitate cloud-based networking. This is an important enabler. And we think that it's going to be a little bit around technology areas like cloud backup, data center to data center replication, because remember, your east-west traffic is 10 times greater than your north-south. Storage and archiving, retrieval. So you're going to have a technology discussion, but you're also going to have a sort of use case discussion. Seasonal traffic to websites, test dev, high volume of contact center, burstable capacity and that sort of thing for contact during peak hours. There's a lot to be said in this area. SPs can also highlight that you can provision these temporary VLANs and VPNs. That's quite important. The secondary opportunity is the backhaul. Everyone forgets about backhaul, but if we're going to go to 4G, you need to backhaul this stuff somehow. Yeah, you do. And of course, heterogeneous networks. It's not going to be 4G. It's going to be 4G with wireless LAN, with unlicensed spectrum, and all. And there's another roundtable on that today, but we're going to talk about that. And we think BOD is part of the platform picture and part of the whole software-defined infrastructure. And here are some potential use cases that will start to accelerate in the whole idea of bandwidth on demand. That is prediction number 10. We also did some research. We talked to a lot of CXOs in telco. And before I conclude and hand off to the next speaker, I just want to bring the attention to these quotes. The first one is a person that believes it's about the architect and horizontal solutions and realizing an end vision across all domains through technology. The second one is the chief executive officer. I can't name them because for the interview we had to keep them anonymous, but they're saying gone are the days of 50% margins. They're not coming back even at 40%. Forget about it. We've moved on. So I say to you, let's move on and tackle the new opportunities in the software-defined world. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll be around all day. All right, man. Cheers.
All right, thank you so much. And our next speaker for the day is Robert, Solution Offer Director, Data Center Solutions, Schneider Electric,